George Foreman, the heavyweight champ, larger than life in every way, passed away today at the age of 76.
In 1973, the fight between champion Joe Frazier and George Foreman was the talk of the boxing world. The mere thought of facing George Foreman was enough to intimidate many. Foreman's presence in the ring was like no other. His raw power and frightening demeanor sent chills through those who faced him. Joe Frazier, however, was determined to stand his ground. As he prepared for the fight, Frazier's unwavering confidence remained intact, despite the overwhelming fear that surrounded his opponent. The year 1973 was pivotal for both men. George Foreman, at the age of 24, was undeniably the scariest athlete on the planet. His knockout ratio was staggering, and his Olympic gold medal stood as proof of his undeniable talent. On the other hand, Joe Frazier, the reigning world heavyweight champion, had already cemented his place in boxing history. Frazier had famously handed Muhammad Ali his first career loss, a victory that left an indelible mark on the sport. Frazier was the kind of boxer who thrived in the most brutal of battles. Despite his toughness, there was something about Foreman that seemed different, something that made even the bravest of men falter at the thought of standing across from him in the ring. Frazier, with his reputation for being a fierce brawler, had placed himself at the top of the heavyweight division. Having secured a shot at the WBC title after a series of dominant performances, Foreman was ready to test his strength against Frazier. The world waited with bated breath to see whether Foreman would dethrone Frazier, extinguishing the champion's legendary fire. Many questioned whether Foreman's raw power would prove to be too much for Frazier's legendary left hook, or if Frazier's heart and experience would be enough to tame the raging storm that was Foreman. Joe Frazier was on top of the world in 1973. With 10 consecutive title defenses and a win over Ali, Frazier had proven himself to be one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. His win over Ali was an achievement that would be revered for generations. While Frazier was often seen as the more humble and gritty fighter compared to the charismatic Ali, he was no less loved by boxing fans. Frazier was the people's champion, known for being the kind of fighter who would defend anyone, even the underdogs, against the bullies. He had earned respect for his toughness, and his fanbase admired his work ethic and the authenticity he brought to the ring. Standing 6 feet 1 inch and weighing 196 pounds, Frazier had an intimidating presence. His power was legendary, and he had fought his way from the amateur ranks to dominate the heavyweight division throughout the late 60s and early 70s. Frazier's personality was as humble as his fighting style was brutal, making him a favorite in boxing's golden era. He was known for his relentless pursuit of victory, and if you weren't in perfect condition, he would make sure you knew it. Despite his success, Frazier wasn't one to play games. He had no interest in the politics of the sport. He simply trained hard and fought hard. 2 years before facing Foreman, Frazier had defeated Muhammad Ali, but since then, his fight output had slowed down. He had only faced 2 opponents, Terry Daniels and Ron Standard, who were considered to be relatively average compared to the challengers Frazier had once faced. Despite this, Frazier was still favored to win against Foreman, thanks to his reputation and the aura of invincibility he carried with him. Foreman's size was a concern, however, as he towered over Frazier just like Ali had. Frazier had a plan, though. He would get low and stay under Foreman's reach, and if that didn't work, he had a few tricks up his sleeve to deal with the massive threat. George Foreman, on the other hand, had far less experience than Frazier, but his youth was on his side. At just 24 years old, Foreman had already accumulated 37 wins, 34 of them by knockout. His Olympic gold medal was proof of his prowess, and though his resume was still growing, it was clear that Foreman was not someone to be underestimated. His intimidating power, combined with his cold and unapproachable demeanor, made him a feared figure in the world of boxing. He wasn't a hero to many, but he certainly earned the respect of anyone who faced him. When asked how he would fight Joe Frazier, Foreman humorously mentioned pulling out a knife and cutting him, showcasing his brutal, no-nonsense approach. Foreman's mentality was clear: a win was a win, no matter the cost. Despite Frazier's superior track record, Foreman's 3 years of experience had been filled with impressive victories over fighters like Chuck Wepner, George Schiavalo, and Gregorio Peralta. With both fighters possessing knockout ratios above 90%, it was widely believed that the fight would not go the distance. A decision victory for either man seemed almost impossible, as both were known for ending fights with a single punch. The stage was set for one of the most anticipated matchups in boxing history. Would Foreman's terrifying power be enough to end Frazier's reign, or would Frazier's heart, toughness, and experience prove to be the difference in a fight that would go down in history? Fight night arrived on January 22, 1973, and both Joe Frazier and George Foreman looked ready to punch a hole through each other. It felt as though they were auditioning for roles in an Indiana Jones movie, both prepared to give one of the most iconic stare-downs in boxing history. In recent years, Foreman admitted that during that moment he prayed Frazier wouldn't look at his legs, as they were shaking with fear. Yet, in the heat of the moment, it felt as if both men were like birds finally freed from a cage, filled with villainous intentions and no clear idea of what they would do next. It promised to be an interesting evening. Frazier was understandably the favorite, but Foreman came out swinging, leading with powerful right punches. Historically, Frazier hadn't been known as a strong first-round fighter, but he was a great champion. You could see the power of his left hook land on Foreman, though Foreman responded with his own force, demonstrating his incredible strength. The crowd roared as Frazier was hit hard. The fight already seemed to be unfolding as many had predicted. As the round progressed, Foreman proved his dominance and the tension in the air grew. Foreman remained poised as he controlled the fight. At one point, with about a minute left in the first round, Frazier hit the canvas, and the crowd erupted in a mix of surprise and awe. Foreman stood calmly in the neutral corner, awaiting the referee's count as Frazier struggled to regain his bearings. As the first round ended, the fight had already proven to be much more lopsided than expected. Frazier was down 3 times in the first round, and it was clear that Foreman was on a mission. Round 2 began with Foreman picking up right where he left off. He unleashed a continuing barrage of punches while Frazier tried, desperately, to find some control amidst the chaos. Despite being overwhelmed, Frazier showed what he was made of. He was certainly one of the game's toughest fighters, but Foreman's power was overwhelming. Frazier was pushed into a corner, his knees buckled under the pressure, and once again Foreman landed a crushing blow that sent Frazier to the canvas for the 4th time in just 4 minutes of action. The fight was becoming more one-sided as Foreman continued to pound away. Frazier had already been knocked down 5 times. 3 times in the first round and twice in the second. The bout had become a target practice session for Foreman, as his strength and precision were simply too much for Frazier to handle. Frazier attempted to rise each time, but he was barely holding on. As the second round neared its conclusion, Frazier went down for the 6th and final time, and this time, there was no getting up. It was over. George Foreman had become the new heavyweight champion of the world, and Joe Frazier had finally suffered his first professional loss. It was a shocking and historic moment. In the aftermath, Frazier was reflective, stating that it was back to the drawing board for him. He knew he had to regroup and start over, learning from the experience. As for Foreman, he marveled at the power of his punch, recalling a moment when he hit Frazier so hard that Frazier's feet actually left the floor, a detail he hadn't realized at the time but now appreciated. It was a move he had been practicing, and it had been the finishing blow that ended Frazier's night. The bout shocked the world, much like Ali's victory over Frazier had done just a few years prior. But instead of having a lovable hero, the boxing world now had a villain, the menacing and unstoppable George Foreman. However, despite his victory, Foreman's reign as champion was not without its challenges. After 2 successful title defenses against Ken Norton and Jose Roman, Foreman's career took a hit when he faced Muhammad Ali. Ali managed to defeat Foreman in what became one of the most famous fights in boxing history, the Rumble in the Jungle. However, after rebuilding himself and winning a rematch with Joe Frazier, Foreman went on to prove his greatness once again. While Foreman had his career foiled by Ali, he rebounded, reinventing himself and developing a new style of fighting. By the end of the 1970s, Foreman had firmly established himself as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, alongside Frazier and Ali. After some impressive comebacks and victories, including a win against Ron Lyle and 2 resounding victories against former world champion Jimmy Ellis and top contender Jerry Quarry, Frazier and Foreman agreed to meet again. The rematch in 1976 wasn't just about settling scores, it was about proving who was the second best heavyweight in the world at that time. Frazier, ever confident and determined, made it clear in his pre-fight comments that this time, things would be different. "I can't promise you how far it's going to go, but I promise you one thing, it ain't going to be no getting up and getting back down." He knew that the fight was no longer about past records or win-loss totals, it was about settling the score and proving who truly deserved to stand at the top of the heavyweight division. The stage was set for another epic showdown. It was another huge night for boxing, as Joe Frazier and George Foreman prepared to face off once again. Both fighters were ready for a battle that would provide fans with the action they craved. With Frazier donning a new look and Foreman's villainous persona slipping slightly, the atmosphere was electric on June 15th. Many hoped that the rematch would reverse the result of their first fight, with Frazier seeking redemption. As the bell rang to start the rematch, anxiety crept in for Frazier's loyal fans, while Foreman's smaller but vocal following braced for what they expected to be another dominant performance. The first round saw Frazier using his classic bobbing and weaving style, but Foreman came out throwing sharp, crisp punches. Unlike the looping punches from their first encounter, Foreman now threw more controlled, straight shots, demonstrating confidence in his ability to do more damage this time around. The crowd was on edge as Foreman's left hand snapped Frazier's head back, and with each exchange, it was clear Foreman was in full control. Frazier, usually slow to start, was being overwhelmed by Foreman's aggression and clean strikes. As the fight progressed into the second round, Foreman continued his attack. He was executing his punches with precision, clearly not engaging in a rope-a-dope situation as in the first fight. Despite Frazier's attempts to land his left hook, Foreman's powerful strikes kept him on the defensive. By the third round, Frazier found brief moments of success, sneaking jabs and left hooks through Foreman's guard, but it wasn't enough. Foreman's larger frame and relentless power kept pushing Frazier back, and soon, the brutal punishment was taking its toll. Frazier's face was bruised and swollen, and Foreman's dominance was evident. As the rounds progressed, Foreman's strength never wavered. In round 4, Frazier attempted to land a few more shots, but Foreman was in total command. The crowd cheered with every left hook Frazier threw, but it was clear that Foreman was on a mission. In round 5, Foreman turned in one of the strongest rounds of his career. His punches remained crisp and controlled, avoiding the usual pitfalls of tiring out mid-fight, a mistake he had made in previous bouts. Frazier was taking heavy punishment as Foreman's right hand and left hook connected with devastating force. The fight was reaching its climax as Frazier struggled to find any rhythm. Foreman, in total control, knocked Frazier down twice in the 5th round, pushing him closer to the edge. By the end of the round, the referee stopped the fight after a brief evaluation, declaring George Foreman the winner once again. History had repeated itself, with Foreman leaving the ring as the undisputed victor of this explosive rematch. After the fight, Foreman showed respect for Frazier, acknowledging his toughness. "I think he's a fine young man and punched pretty good," Foreman said, recognizing Frazier's resilience. But he also noted that for 5 rounds, Frazier took all the punishment he could endure. "For the consideration that you have for me, I think it's time for me to put it on the wall and go in and just boogie," he said, reflecting on the fight and his own career. Over the years, Joe and George developed a mutual respect, becoming friends despite their fierce rivalry in the ring. Foreman continues to put Frazier on a pedestal, calling him one of the greatest. "George didn't take no step back," Frazier said in recognition of Foreman's relentless attack, adding, "He's a good guy, and I'm proud of him." Foreman, on the other hand, acknowledged the resilience of Frazier, who got up time and time again after being knocked down in their first bout. Both Joe Frazier and George Foreman were exceptional athletes, personalities, and pillars of boxing during one of the sport's brightest eras. Their contributions to the sport are undeniable, and boxing fans will forever celebrate their greatness. Without these two legends, the sport would have suffered a great loss, and for that, they will always be remembered and praised. Until further notice, boxing fans will continue to honor their legacy, forever celebrating the incredible battles they shared in the ring.